This week's episode is sponsored by Audio-Technica.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
The history of photography, like the history of art, is often bound by a preeminent canon, and no, we're not talking about cameras and lenses in this case. Within art history and academic circles, the word canon refers to a conventional timeline of artists who are considered as genuine by connoisseurs. Efforts to shake up this canon have gained traction in recent years, shedding light on photographers previously underrepresented or unknown. One area of note is the history of women photographers, with a wide variety of books, exhibitions, and activities dedicated to rebalancing the scales that have long tipped in favor of men. Case in point, in the 1949 edition of Beaumont-Newhall's seminal History of Photography, as well as the updated version published in 1978, there are only 13 women photographers mentioned. And you ready for this? They're not even the same 13. Helen Levitt and Tina Modotti, who first appeared in the first edition, were somehow lost when they added Diane Arbus and Hannah Hawk into the 1978 edition. Go figure. The recent book, A World History of Women Photographers, co-authored by Luce Lebart and Marie Robert, commissioned essays from 160 writers and curators to highlight the careers and images of 300 women photographers from around the world, many of whom are new names even for the most ardent fans of photography. I know I learned a few. In celebration of Women's History Month, we are honored to welcome French curator and historian Luce Lebart, along with one of the book's contributing writers, Pauline Vermare, to discuss the groundbreaking book on today's show.
Hey there, Jill here. Before we introduce this week's guest, I'm jumping in with a quick programming update. As you know, we generally release bi-weekly episodes of the show on Thursday afternoons at 4 p.m. Eastern to be enjoyed starting with your Thursday evening commute. We're always looking for ways to enhance our listeners' experience, so we're moving future episode drops to daybreak at 6 a.m. Eastern, just in time for your morning commute. And since International Women's Day falls on Wednesday, March 8th, we're making today's show available on Wednesday morning, with future shows reverting to a Thursday morning release date. Back to you, Alan.
Okay, now, on with today's guests. Luce Lebart is the co-author with Marie Robert of A World History of Women Photographers. A photography historian and curator currently based in Paris, she is a researcher for the Archive of Modern Conflict, a collection and publishing house based between London and Toronto. Luce served as director of the Canadian Institute for Photography from 2016 to 2018 after spending 5 years directing the collections of the French Society of Photography in Paris. Pauline Vermare is a French photography curator and historian based in New York City. A contributing writer to the World History of Women Photographers, she was formerly the cultural director of Magnum Photos in New York, a curator at the International Center of Photography and the Museum of Modern Art. From 2002 to 2009, she worked at the Henri Cartier-Bresson Foundation in Paris. Luce Lebart and Pauline Vermare, welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you.
It's really great to have you here. We're going to be asking questions to both of you, but I want to start off with a question for Luce. And again, it's okay to just pop in and add your own 2 cents into it if you want to, no matter who's talking. That's the way we do the show. The marketing description for A World History of Women Photographers uses the word manifesto in the second paragraph. Can you give us some context for this word choice?
Yes, it's not only for marketing. The book is a kind of proposal and also a program. The project started from the observation that women photographers are absent from the histories of photography. You mentioned it. And the book proposition is to turn things around by making a big, thick, and heavy historical reference book only devoted to women photographers. So 300 are gathered in this World History of Women Photographers. And more specifically, the book proposal is based on essays written by women authors. These women come from all geographical and cultural backgrounds. They're academics, curators, writers, picture editors, and even right holders. And to Marie and I, the fact that the texts on women photographers are written by women is a strong editorial gesture, like a statement. It reverses the historical erasure of women photographers. And one of its reasons, this one reason being that in the field of the history of photography, as in many disciplines, history has mainly been written by men or by authors that could ignore the question of gender. So the fact that the essays are written by women is also acknowledging the first works on women photographers. Those works, they've been mostly made and produced by women. The book is a kind of program because we must admit that it lacks many women photographers. There are thousands and thousands of them, and our book only shows the tip of the iceberg. It suggests that many researches have to be made, have to come, exhibition, books. And as we mentioned in its introduction, we have aimed at completing the history that already exists. Marie and I, we both think, and it was very important in the making of the book, that there is a need to erect new models and to create a narrative that is richer and more fair, more inclusive. I mean, to write another history and to write it differently. So the project, in a way, is political. We both think that it is essential to offer the role models for all genders. The project embraces as well multiculturalism. It affirms the social and constructive dimension of all identities, whether they be sexual or racial. And in the end, these books aims at proposing an alternative world history of photography seen through the prism of gender and of a cultural decentralization. So it just lays out its beginning and its promises.
You know, something I have to mention is that in reading this book, and I don't want to say, this is a massive book. I mean, lift with your knees, not your back. You'll hurt yourself. This is a serious volume of photography. And I was reading the essays, and as a male, I realized we've been horrible all this time. I mean, I knew this all. I mean, this is nothing new. But a lot of the wording was kind of strong. But then I read one paragraph that got me and kind of like neutralized it for me. And that was that there was an acknowledgement. And I think it's very true, and I was glad to see it there, that as of about 20 years ago, it's no longer the case that women are being, just brushed aside and overlooked. Another thing I think is very, very important to mention is that when I started going through this book, I was dropping little tag notes at the bottom of the pages for photographers that I liked. I stopped pretty quickly. I ran into a volume of work from photographers. I would say 98% of them I never heard their names before or saw their work. This is a volume that if you were to take the gender aspect out of the title and out of the theme, what you would have left is a magnificent volume and documentation of photography from the earliest time. That was my takeaway, is that this is a very solid document, as good as anything that Newhall ever put out. If you want to learn about photography, how it evolved, and the different contexts of photography.
I think it's very interesting what you said about the good representation nowadays of women photographers. It allows me to mention that in France, compared with the US, we're very late. And the first work promoting women photographers started mainly in the US and more than 40 years ago. In France, it's a recent phenomenon. And now it's totally changed. In 4 years, everything has changed. And also, when you mention the fact that anybody who would look at this book, when you look at the image, in no way you can you can guess if it's a man or a woman. There are maybe one or two exceptions, but otherwise, photos have no gender, of course.
Right. Now, on that topic, and we're talking about recognition here. I got to mention something here, and I just want to hear your reaction to it. And it's, again, this is my observation. And that before coming to B&H, which is about 16 or so years ago, I spent about 30 years photographing editorial, corporate, and advertising assignments. And I would say that very easily, 75% of my work came from female art buyers, female art directors, and female designers. Males were always a minority amongst those who called me to give me, a white guy from Brooklyn, work to do all over the place. Yeah. And my question is, why was that the case? Why has it taken it so long for women to become recognized equally amongst art buyers and art directors when it comes to giving an assignment? I know there was a lot of talent out there and they weren't all male.
It's very interesting. And in France, we can observe the same thing. Picture editors are often women. And what is interesting is that recently, a woman that was a picture editor in a well-known magazine in France, she realized that for years, she was close to retirement, she realized that for years, she didn't take care about encouraging also women, finding a balance. And she regretted it. And she created a festival in France every year, and it's devoted to women photographers. So it's a real question why it took so long, but it's happening now.
Just to break in here, that was my experience too. That's how I entered the photo world. I was a longtime photo editor and worked with, 90% male photographers. And most of my colleagues were also women. Actually, the company that I worked for was a women-owned, women-run company. So it's definitely, for a long time, something that has been the case, that women worked behind the scenes in the photo world.
It's the deeply rooted system of the hunter-gatherer, and this is also something that I was witnessing at Magnum in Paris when I was an intern there, when I was 20-something. Most of the staff was women, and then most of the photographers were men, and there was this whole hunter-gatherer thing going, and nobody was aware of it. It was not... But it was, in hindsight, it was now looking at it from our perspective, and what Luce Lebart and Marie Robert have done is also, putting this on the table and saying, well, maybe this model is too old and maybe we should look at it differently. And this is all very positive development, that we realized that this was a little bit old-fashioned and that now we can think in different ways.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Luce, I want to get back to the book. There were 160 women writers and curators who you commissioned to write the essays about the women photographers. Which came first, the contributors, as you call them, or the photographers that you wanted to feature?
It's a difficult question because I'm tempted to say that they all came together in a very organic way. That the network was a bit like a blob, spreading, becoming bigger and bigger. But more practically, it was done in consultation. We had an initial list of essential names of photographers from 19th century, from Anna Atkins to Zanele Muholi. And to develop the list, we called on international specialists, male and female, who each in their field offered us names of photographers and potential writers. For example, for Brazil, the curator Tiago Nogueira introduced us to the careers of multiple photographers and made us also discover the richness of research in the field in his country. And another example is Australia. In Australia, Sean Lakin, who is chief curator of the National Gallery of Australia, he was also a referent. So the people he referred us to new names and new authors. One was a specialist of 19th century women photographer in Hawaii, another in New Zealand. I think we wouldn't have been, of course, able to access to all this knowledge, all this research, this energy, and these images without developing a network at the same time as we were making the book.
Very interesting. So actually, there were male photo specialists who were involved in the research and recommendations.
Yes.
It makes me think of hearkening back to what we were just talking about within the photo world, the history of magazine work in terms of writers was that women were used as researchers but could not be writers in the, say 50s and earlier of the editorial model. So it's sort of a similar situation where certain men filled the research role, but then the actual written work was commissioned to women, correct?
Of course, it was a bit arbitrary. Like, for example, for Tiago Nogueira, who is a word specialist of Claudia Andujar, it was a bit hard to step away and to give the writing to someone else. But then he understood the project, and he helped us because he thought, well, I'm going to encourage one of my assistants who is less known, who has less opportunity to write or to curate. It was interesting discussion.
That's really great. So how many countries are there in the final selection of photographers for the book?
We're about 60 countries. The question of country is not easy because what do we mean by a country? Do we mean the birth country?
Right.
Do we mean the country that the photographer has chosen, or the country where she died? And it was very interesting to have all that on the table. For example, some, let's say, Julia Margaret Cameron, who is a very, very well-known British photographer. She was born in Sri Lanka, and she's British. So where would we put her?
So all of that said, how did you determine ultimately how to label each of these photographers as far as where they are from, quote unquote?
First, we start by the nationality, and then we understood it didn't work. So still we kept the nationality in our, let's say, Excel file. But then we decided to structure the book following the date of birth. The different portraits of women are sorted out chronologically regarding their date of birth, and we indicate where they were born and where they died. Because some of them also, especially notably living ones, they wouldn't want to share necessarily their nationality. For example, they didn't want to appear in this book because they were Moroccan, but because they were a photographer. So it was more neutral to talk about where they were born, because that you don't choose it.
Understood. Interesting point.
Did the writers recommend photographers that they wanted to feature in the book, or did you assign people photographers to write about?
It would go in the two ways, and with a lot of conversation and talk. I must say that the project developed during the pandemic. So we were all at home, most of us, and connected. So it was a special moment as well to share ideas. There was a big solidarity and sisterhood. I remember in July 2019, when we really started commissioning the authors, the first author I wrote to is Deepali Diwan. She's the chief curator of Asian art in the Rome Museum in Toronto, Canada. And she immediately answered. Pauline, it was the same. When I sent you a message, you immediately answered. I would be more than happy to collaborate. There was really a joyful energy that helped the project to build himself in a short time.
That's great. So the book was first published in French in 2020, and the English language edition was published in October 2022. Were there any changes or updates or additions made between the two French and English editions?
Yeah, it was published in French at the end of 2020. So, in fact, there were no much change. We updated the bibliography and we reread the translation, but everything was made by Thames and Hudson. They contacted each authors one by one to get the rights, to help approve the translation. And they contacted as well the photographers and the right holders. So it was very probably a huge work. The big part of our work concerned the French edition.
Mm-hmm. And so Thames and Hudson, who was the English language publisher, handled all the translations and all that.
Yeah, from what I know, yes. There's something that many of the articles were written in English. Not all of them, but some of them, a good quantity of them.
So a lot of them had to first be translated into French initially to get published.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Interesting.
That saved a little bit of work up front. Okay. There are several examples in the book of women photographers who worked alongside a male photographer, and quite often it was their spouse. But they did not always receive equal recognition. How frequent was that? And also, let me add to the equation, how often was it the reverse?
Yeah, well, the reverse, I can't find of an example right now, but it certainly exists. Pauline, maybe you have an example of a man who helped a woman to grow in her career.
I would think so, yes. Or certainly couples. I know more of couples who were both artists.
Yes.
I would have to think more of,
Yes.
I would have to think of the opposite. Yeah, that's rare, but I'm sure it happens.
Yes, but it really often happened that women stayed in the shadow of a master, whether the master is the husband or the brother. And you mentioned the example maybe of a couple with Bernd and Ila Becher in Germany. It's kind of striking because it's quite close to us. And the work of Ila, at the beginning, her name was not mentioned notably in their first exhibition. There are many examples of women that stayed in the shadow of their husband. Like the one that is very interesting is Constance Talbot. She's the wife of Sir William Henry Fox Talbot, who is the inventor of photography of the negative positive principle process, the calotype process. She assisted him in his experiments while he was inventing photography. So in this context, she really very probably is one of the first women to have produced photographic image. But who remembers her today? Nobody. There's another example. Amélie Guillot-Saguez, she's French, and her calotype, so the salted paper process invented by Talbot, they were exhibited in 1840s in Paris. She won a bronze medal, but the spokesman for the jury, he confused her with her husband. And it often happens that in inventories of collection, the term Mr. is associated to the woman photographer. So that's how they've disappeared also in collection.
This conversation is making me remember something I haven't thought of in a long time. When I first started taking photographs myself, I was living in France. And my name, Jill, translates sort of easily as the male Gilles. And I often would get comments from people thinking I was a man. The first time I met them and they knew me as a photographer, they would be sort of surprised.
So if they only heard your name, they just assumed it was Gilles.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, but sure, I could see that it very easily happened.
And I found it actually was really helpful to have that first name. And then they would look at me when we met in person and they would be, "You took this picture?" with a big question mark. They couldn't believe it.
Names could be funny the way they do that, but that's interesting how it affected you in France. Yeah. How long did it take you to catch on to that?
I think pretty quickly. It shocked me how my name sort of translated and people made a certain assumption.
Maybe it's worth mentioning that in France and in other countries, women were for a long time excluded from like societies, schools, clubs,
Right.
photography,
Sure.
institutions. And Marie, she mentions in her text, one of the texts of the introduction, she mentioned the Canadian Clara Ciprol. She wanted to enter the Buffalo camera, but she couldn't. She could only do it through her photographer brother. He was acting as an intermediary. And there are other examples like Marie Somerville, who was a woman scientist who researched about the photosensibility of vegetables, how to make photos with fruits and vegetables. And she wasn't able to present her work at the Royal Society, but she did it through Sir John Herschel, the astronomer, who was a photographer as well.
Wow.
So in science, these mechanisms of denial, and the minimization of women's contribution in the history of science was called the Matilda effect by this historian Margaret Rossiter.
Right.
It's nothing new, and it's not just photography. Unfortunately, I mean, this has been the way of the world in many aspects, and continues to be that way in many aspects of life. Slowly but surely, it has to be chiseled away.
Yeah. Concerning the geographical representativeness, I think I didn't mention how important it was for us to avoid the pitfall of a Western-centered approach. Marie and I, we both are French, and we developed the project from France with concepts and methods inherited from European cultural history. And that's really why we had to work with an international network. And we also really wanted to include women photographers coming from all over the world. Like from Greenland, we have Pia Arke, in Argentina, Sarah Facio, in Turkey and South Africa, Yildiz Moran and Leslie Lawson, in Brazil and Nigeria with Marilyn Nance. So I think personally, it's one of the things I'm the most proud of. All those voices that have written on photographers coming from different parts of the world. At the beginning of the project, we thought, oh la la, are we going to find some women photographers in the 19th century in Panama? Were they women photographers in 19th century in Greenland, in Cuba, in New Zealand? We were a bit worried at the beginning. Intuitively, we were sure there was something to do, but we couldn't imagine we would find so many answers, so many propositions, so many researchers working, trying to in Cuba, researching in Portugal, researching in archives, naming the women photographer.
It's an amazing book. This is the kind of book that you go through it and it's really satisfying. And you don't blow through it fast. You go through this book slowly. But before we go take a short break, I have one more question I can't resist asking you. And that is that I couldn't help notice that the cover of this book on female photographers is blue. Now, not that many years ago, the default color of this book would have automatically been pink. Was this intentional that you had a bright blue cover on a book on women photographers?
So I have to say that the cover decisions were not were the choice of the publishers. The French cover is green.
Okay.
Yeah, it's different. This is when you ask me if there was some difference in the book, I should have mentioned that. This is the main, big, huge difference. The book cover is different. The French one represents a photo by Pushpa Mala, who is an Indian contemporary photographer, and it's a self-portrait with a gun. So it's a bit aggressive, but it's also it refers to many covers of book on women, and the Thames and Hudson cover is totally beautiful with this blue and this photo by Angel Etundi Esamba. So yeah, this is a difference. I don't know about the color. We were surprised, Marie and I, by the choice of the green. It's often that when you're a writer, you don't necessarily choose the cover.
Interesting. Well, when you send us images for our show notes, if you could send us photographs of both covers, we should run both of them because our
Good
listeners are all
idea.
over the
Yeah,
place,
it's
right?
very interesting. You're right.
Good
Yes.
idea.
Definitely do that. So it's always good to see how different artists and different designers treat the same subject. So definitely include that.
Yes.
So, one last question. Have there been any exhibits from this book, or is it something that you anticipate for the future?
We haven't really anticipated a global exhibition on this project, but since it's published, many exhibitions have flourished. There were already many exhibitions on women photographer, and our book is not the first one at all. Yeah, what I've noticed is that some festival places, museum, they focus on showing the work of one woman photographer, to share it in detail with many images. Our book is really a book. It was a book project. If someone would like to enhance it and to do a volume 2 or 3, it could happen, but then it would be so heavy, so it takes so much room. We were thinking more about a database that would allow us as well to share the data freely. And many databases are rising now on different, like on photographers. WOFA, who helped us for Cuba, they are developing a database on 19th century women photographer in Cuba, and it's
Interesting. Yeah, Women Photograph is a big database here in the U.S. that's international, but it started in the U.S. and they're just coming out with a book of women photographers based on the photographers in their database.
Yes, exactly. There are so many projects, so many exciting communities, and we've been helped a lot also by association and a collective like Fast Forward in England. We contacted some of the researchers there, and they would put us in contact with another association in different countries. So
there's also the group 10 by 10.
Yes.
Yeah, in the U.S., they're doing some phenomenal work.
Phenomenal. Yes. And I love their book about women photo books. It's one of the most beautiful book. Also, I love photo books, and the design is incredible. It's a wonderful book. Yeah.
Yeah, Rosette Lederman. The book is called What They Saw.
But it's very interesting because her sister is a documentalist in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I was in contact with her because she works also on promoting women photographer from 19th century, but specific women photographer who worked in museum. And she's discovered one photographer that is lacking in our book.
Oh, wow.
So that is also we got in contact because she sent a message saying, "Oh, but there is not this woman photographer," and I answered, "But that we miss so many because 300 is already a lot, but a book is a book. We couldn't put it." It's a good network, a good community, very sisterhood, a lot of sisterhood.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, more with Luce Lebart, Pauline Vermare, and a world history of women photographers. Stay tuned.
Designed with content creators in mind, Audio-Technica combined the studio quality of their ATH M50X headphones with the clarity of their 20 series microphones to create the professional ATH M50X STS stream set to fit the headset needs of serious gamers and streamers. Whether you're podcasting, gaming, or on a studio-based production, the ATH M50X STS stream set provides outstanding build quality and field-tested audio performance, and it's available in XLR and USB versions at bnh.com. Learn more about Audio-Technica products at bnh.com using the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back. Pauline, I have a question for you. We got a brief introduction to your work in the intro, but could you give us a little bit more about your background? You were born and educated in France, but you've been working as a photography curator and historian here in the States for many years. Besides the language differences, what kind of transition was there, if any, from working in France to the United States? Are there any differences in the approach to photo history or curating, editing, or anything like that sort between the two cultures?
It's an interesting question. For me, the first shock was coming from a small institution, which was the Henri Cartier-Bresson Foundation in Paris. At the time, it was just three of us in a small building in Montparnasse. And then moving into the photo department at MoMA, which was an institution in and of itself, the department on its own, that was quite vertiginous, right? It was this big, incredible museum with an incredible history. So that was a big shock. Incredibly overwhelming and good and bad, but mostly, of course, positive. I felt very privileged to have this opportunity to work with Peter Galassi on the Cartier-Bresson exhibition at MoMA at the time. That was in 2009. In terms of photography and how we see it or how we feel it, really, I feel like in France maybe, and I don't want to generalize because of course there are so many kinds of photography and so many, but I feel like maybe in France we have a very instinctive relationship to photography, not conceptual at all, very direct, in a very sometimes poetic way, spiritual way. And here what I have noticed is that there was much more conceptual. First of all, there's many people who actually study photography, Yale being the most famous, I guess, but there are so many. And in France, there's less, and Cartier-Bresson was always making a joke that you can't teach or learn photography. It has to be an instinct, right? It has to be something that comes to you. And then as you view the photograph, this is something that you feel. And I think that that's the distinction I would make. And again, generalizing in many ways to apprehend photography. But that would explain, for instance, why a photographer like Saul Leiter, American photographer, is so loved in France and not so well known here because it's more about, it's nothing, he took photos in his neighborhood. And for some reason, in the East Village in the 50s, color work, for some reason, it moves us, and I say us because I deeply love his work and I'm on the board of his foundation. But I feel like something like this, there's different approaches to what photography is or should be, maybe. But yes, other than that, I feel like, both New York and Paris are very important centers for photography, and you can see it in the institutions. How many institutions for photography in Paris? It's incredible, the number of museums that are fully dedicated to photography. Here in New York, it's different. There's ICP, but there is no, the rest is really museums who have, that have a photo department. And even when it is like the Whitney Museum, like to do photography shows, but also to incorporate photography within other exhibitions, which I find wonderful. When you go see a painting show and here are also photographs. Photography is seen in many museums, and I think MoMA now as well, as a part of a whole. It's integrated into painting, sculpture, etc., which is something that in France is not so much. It's not so much the case now, but I think it's evolving as well in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, Pauline, one of your areas of study and a focus for several of the essays you wrote for the book is women photographers in Japan. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some background on that topic? Do Japanese women photographers face different concerns or challenges compared to their counterparts elsewhere?
So when Luce Lebart and Marie Robert reached out to me, and indeed this was really an email that I will remember because it really triggered some joy. And yes, it was a very joyful moment to think, oh, incredible, a book is going to be published on the subject of women photographers. And it felt like a moment. It felt important. It was a break in something because, as Luce mentioned, in France particularly, we are struggling with that a little bit with feminism. We can't even really say that word, does it exist in France? What does it mean, etc. So when I was asked, if I would participate, of course, I said absolutely. And then what photographers did I have in mind? So I started making lists. And as it happens, I grew up in Japan. So I grew up in France, but then moved to Japan when I was 10.
Oh, wow.
And so instinctively, a few names, came to mind of Japanese women photographers. But also because indeed, my instinct was telling me that there was a problem in Japan, not unlike the one we faced in France and to some extent here, but as I would say, because of the society structure, and the French patriarchy is different than the American one. In Japan, still to this day, it's difficult for a woman to have a life beyond, being a wife, being a mother. And so being a photographer in Japan was always, for a woman, very difficult. And you had to really be determined and strong to pursue your career. And even when you were, then you were not really seen. And so I asked Japanese friends who they would recommend to write about. And so that's how I came up with a few names for that list. And so then Marie and Luce came back to me and said, would be great if you would write about them. And I also wrote about Dina Templeton and Nancy Burson. But so the Japanese women, it was both my attachment to Japan and my closeness to that culture, but also the realization that these women would not be known and that they needed to be included in that first selection.
The two women that you wrote about, are they still living or?
Well, in fact, Tsuneko Sasamoto just passed away at the age of 107, which is incredible. And in the end, she was really mostly known for her age, much more so than anything else. She had become a national treasure, which is an official title in Japan. And she was really well known in Japan, but not so much here in the US. She became a little more well known. In fact, you were asking difference between French and English editions of Luce and Marie's book. One in this little text about Tsuneko Sasamoto, first of all, is that she had passed away, but also in the meantime, she had been recognized by an American curator called Andrea Nelson of the National Gallery in DC, who included her work in her book called The New Woman Behind the Camera. But so I wanted to include that little note. She was not well known outside of Japan, and then she had that moment in the US, and now she's better known. Toyoko Tokiwa passed away also not so long ago in 2020. So both women had long careers and did incredible work, different work. Tsuneko Sasamoto was a photojournalist. In fact, she's known as being the first Japanese woman photojournalist. She started working in the 30s, 40s in Japan, which makes her a little bit controversial just because she documented imperialistic Japan. And so, of course, these are photographs of, for instance, the Hitler Youth coming to Japan in 1938 after the signature of the tripartite agreement, or, photos of that moment in history. And then after the war, she became quite the pacifist, focusing on women and artists. And so you have the whole history of Japan from nationalism through the war and then the American occupation and so on until 2022, which is an incredible wide array of years, and to see, how Japan evolved since the 30s is really impressive. And then Toyoko Tokiwa used her brother's camera, and she started documenting really her own surroundings. She was from Yokohama, and in Yokohama, which is near Tokyo, there was an American military base in the 50s, and she started taking photos of Japanese women working as prostitutes in the red light district around the military base. She called it working women, quote unquote, mostly those prostitutes. But she was looking into that relationship and the new identity of the Japanese woman after the war and what that created, what the occupation provoked, and how, in general, beyond the prostitutes and the military base, what did it mean in Japan to be a working woman? And her book, called Kikenna Adabana, which means dangerous and toxic flower, meaning working women being dangerous and toxic flowers in Japanese society. It was a revolution, that book, because not only did she take those photos that were beautiful photographs, but also she wrote the text. And on the cover of the book, you can see her behind her camera. The eye that you can see is wide open. And it was really revolutionary and very radical because it was a Japanese woman expressing herself at the time when the society was really, really not promoting, or certainly not helping women to to have a voice. And I would say in the 50s, France was pretty much the same. And her work was not well known until it became a little bit better known in the past years since she passed away. But it's the book that I refer to was really noted as one of the most important photo books in Japanese photography history. So I'm so glad that she was included in Luce and Marie's book.
That's fascinating.
Another name that is appeared in the book and whose work I'm familiar with is Nancy Burson. And today, everyone's talking about AI and Chat GPT and just the whole thing about how photography is just becoming just run by artificial intelligence. And Nancy Burson started playing around with morphing technologies and computers, easily 10, 12, 15 years ago. I'm not sure how far it goes back. But the picture that first attracted me to her work appeared on the cover of Time magazine. And everyone's talking about how new this is, but Nancy Burson was doing this years ago, and Time magazine already had 2 covers from her. She did a composite of Putin and Trump for another cover that they did. And again, she's doing this stuff already. So when people say, is artificial intelligence going to be affecting photography? Damn straight it is.
Absolutely. And so she started in the 80s, really. She was at MIT. She was a scientist and a photographer, and she was invited to work on that subject of photomorphing. And so through computer science and with colleagues at MIT, she came up with really what became morphing and Photoshop, but way before Photoshop. And her technique of aging faces, for instance, helped the FBI ask, have you seen this child, 5 years later? That's what that child would look like. So her work really had ramifications way beyond the world of photography. And it is interesting because she always in her work was pointing in that direction, which is, she's still today, by the way. I spoke with her yesterday to tell her we're going to talk about her today. I follow her work closely. And she really was and is a visionary at the sort of literal sense. Like she has the vision of what the world, all those techniques, she didn't see them coming. She put them forward. I mean, she was talking about the beauty of it and the horror of it, right? Of those fake images. So today you have someone like Fred Richin, for instance, the photo historian, published recently a very important article in Vanity Fair on that subject. In 1984, he had already published an article on the dangers of manipulated truth. Is this truth? Is it fiction? And Nancy Burson, from the onstage of those technologies, said, well, here is what it is, and here is what I could make you believe, right, with that. And here is also messages of hope. So it was always this ambiguous territory that she was exploring between denunciating things as they are, racism, misogyny, trying to promote gender fluidity and openness to diversity. Recently, she did also a big work on global warming. So through these transformations, the artificial intelligence, she has been since the 80s really looking into all the potential of that weapon of mass communications. And I think in that sense, she's one of the most important photographers working with technology because she absolutely knew what was happening.
Yeah. That said, I think it would be fair to say that Nancy Burson is to AI and this type of imaging as Graham Nash is to digital printing. They both saw what was possible and worked with people who could make it possible, and we're all using it now.
Absolutely.
And one of the real important aspects of Nancy Burson's work is the fact that she understands the consequences of the work and using it ethically and using it with positive aspects in mind.
Yes, that's true. That's a very important point, is that she always tries to, whilst asking questions, political, social, and otherwise, always bringing it back to, in fact, the message at the core is really love of humanity. And more recently, she's worked a lot on that, trying to bring a more peaceful message And I think between Nancy Burson and Fred Richin, we have a perfect combination of alerting in positive and more alarming ways. And I think we should be reading and looking at their work, both of them, very closely.
Yeah, definitely. So, Pauline, when looking at the world history of women photographers as a whole, did you make any new discoveries about photographers you didn't know about as you were flipping through the pages of the finished book?
Absolutely. So many. It was a joy to look through, and I still am discovering it's such a big, incredible book and accumulation of information. So yes, and I have absolutely discovered many artists, and I'm so grateful for this project. And I also, in fact, was inspired by this book to do another book. And so I want to thank Luce for inspiring me to do a bit of a sibling of this book, because it is, a descendant or a sibling. But I realized that we needed a book on Japanese women photographers, because in the end, we only know male Japanese photographers. We don't know many of them either. So it's not like we know many men. We don't really know Japanese photography so well. And so this book triggered the desire to do another book, a book on Japanese women photographers.
Wow. And is that still in process?
Yes, it's being made, and it will come out next year, 2024, in America, France, and Japan, and there will be a show in Arles at the festival.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So Luce, I can't thank you enough for inspiring, and you and Marie have inspired so many of us to push in that direction, because this is the tip of the iceberg. This is a book that brings questions. You have questions popping into your head all the time reading this book, which is the most beautiful project. It's not an affirmation, it's a question. It's a real success for that too.
That's great. So focusing on the book as a whole, do you have a favorite lesser or unknown women photographer who you think would be of particular interest to our listeners?
My answer is maybe not very original, but I still love Anna Atkins desperately. She's the first one in our book, and she's the author of the first photo book. I think one of the discovery and I had so many. It's a very difficult question, but I got very interested in the work of Alice Seeley Harris, who photographed the atrocity committed by the Belgian army to indigenous people in Congo. She's considered as one of the first whistleblower. And I've been fascinated by the commitment of those women and their care for others, nature, and poor people, handicap their attention to many things.
And Pauline?
I was really happy to see Abigail Heyman, her work in the book. For me, knowing of the work and having, in fact, seen the book in Russell Lederman's 10 by 10 photo salon that we talked about. And that book really had stayed with me. I was really moved and impressed, and I thought this book is incredible. And so to see her here with that photograph that's incredible of her taking photos of her own abortion in 1974, I think it's incredible. And the quote, and if I can read it, I have disregarded women as I disregarded myself, and I have changed. I have faced the conflicts inherent in growing up female, as I am now facing the conflicts in trying to change. This is where I come from. This is what I want to document. A testament to this project also is that there's that quote, if I'm not for me, who will be? And I think there's something here in Luce and Marie's project to say, it is a women's project, not to exclude others, but really to be able to make sure that we're including as many of those voices as possible, so that then it can have ramifications well beyond this project.
Interesting.
Well, for whatever it's worth, I mentioned early on in the show that I started leaving little tags of paper at the bottom of the pages where I saw somebody's work that I was not familiar with, and I said, wow, I really like this. I want to talk about this. It was impossible. I mean, every other page I said, wow, I've never seen this person's work before. And it goes back to the 1860s. There was some amazing work being done by women that you look at and you go, that's pretty advanced for this state of the art. And they were right up there. And it wasn't just taking pictures where the exposures came out and there was a recognizable image. They were good portraits, really good portraits. And there were strong architectural compositions. And they were carefully thought out images. And they're wonderful. And I think that's one of the real values of this book is that it's a treasure for photography. Yes, it emphasizes the female role of photography, but at the end of the day, it's also a darn good photography book and one of the best I've seen in a very long time.
Yeah. So, Pauline, I'm so glad that you brought up that quote, because last Thursday night I went to a talk at the Whitney Museum about a show that was curated from the collection of Judy Lauder. And there was a quote read that was from Ruth Bernhard that men photograph women as if she belongs to them, and women photograph women as if they belong to the universe. And I thought that was just so fitting for
absolutely. And here's the question of agency and empowerment. And I think these are the two core motors of a book like this, is that, it's empowering to women photographers, of course, and historians such as myself, to be asked to be invited to participate. But it's also empowering for anyone who's been in the blind spot of photo history, who's not been represented, and to know that we are in a moment in photo history where these blind spots are slowly being investigated, and people are taking great pleasure in looking into that and saying, oh, well, I've never heard of someone like this, and so I'm going to do a project about that photographer. And I think this is really a very positive development for us all.
Well said. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it's been a wonderful hour or so of discussions with questions on and off the script, which I happen to like. Luce, thank you so much for joining us. What's next for you? Do you have any new curatorial or writing projects in the works right now?
Yeah, well, I've just opened a show on mauvaise herbe, it's called. It's on wildflowers, wild plants, which are qualified as bad in French. And I'm also co-artistic director of a festival in Italy that is starting in the end of April. It's called Photo Europea, and many other projects.
And how can our listeners find out more about your work? Do you have any links to these sites? And we will be putting these links onto our show notes.
Yes, exactly. A link to the photo festival in Italy, a link to the Mauvaise Herbe exhibition, the weeds, all about weeds exhibition, for example.
And we will be including these links in our show notes. And Pauline, what's next for you?
I'm going to install a show on Friday, and I hope that many of you can see it, of Kunie Sugiura's work, a Japanese woman photographer who's been living in the US since the 60s. That's opening March 16th at Alison Bradley Projects in Chelsea. And then I'm working on the book and show that I mentioned on Japanese women photographers, and that will open in 2024. And I'm also working on a show by a Japanese man called Akihiko Okamura, who worked in Ireland. I just finished my PhD a few months ago, and that was about Ireland, nothing to do with Japan. It was about the visual representation of Ireland from 1969 to today. And during this research, I found a Japanese photographer who had moved to Ireland in 1968 with his family and had been going back and forth between Dublin and the North to document the conflict. And it's the most incredible work. So I'm doing a book and a show, and in fact also a film about him. And that will all premiere at the Photo Museum Ireland in Dublin next spring.
Wow. Okay, so you're busy. Okay.
Yes. It's all good.
Good for you. And again, we're going to have all the links to all of these in our show notes for our listeners who'd like to keep track of what you guys are up to. Luce Lebart and Pauline Vermare, wonderful speaking to you today. And the book, again, is A World History of Women Photographers. We all highly recommend it. It is an important document. And it's a pleasure to go through. It really, really is an enlightening book, for lack of better words.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you all.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are a fan of the show but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests and show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our senior creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Jeremy Weiss, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of all of the above, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Audio Technica for sponsoring this week's episode.